again, what I'd like to do is just touch back on this Ghana thing. You met the two things. I had to quickly get a pen because it's running out and make a note. You said you had a school choice you already had in Ghana. I think you mentioned Yaa Asantewaa.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, wow, because I've got an idea of who that lady is, and a good idea. And you've got schools named after her. And I remember growing up, I went to St. Richard's and St. Joseph's, so pretty much male-named schools. You know, they're always after saints and stuff. But we had St. Mary's, and you've got all these. But the fact that you've got names of these iconic figures from the homeland, it's the perfect segue to let me know, look, you've got to tell us more about Ghana. Who is this figure? Yeah. And just give me a bit of the cultural, in Ghana, I guess there's many groups, potential tribes, and just so could you just give us a little insight into what that is? And who Yaa Asantewaa is and why they got schools named after her?
Well, the Yaa Asantewaa school, because actually I kind of wonder myself how old that is, because Yaa Asantewaa is a historical figure for a long time, was not really liked by the British establishment. So I wonder when the school was actually built. But so Yaa Asantewaa is a woman. She was a grandmother who fought in the last Anglo-Asante War in 1900 that finished in 1901. And it was a war for the golden stool of Asante. And the golden stool is believed to contain the soul of the Asante people. And the priest who brought it down, the traditional priest, the Komfanoche, commanded it from the heavens over 500 years ago. And it is said that, it contains the soul. And if it is ever taken away, that will be the end of the Asante Confederacy. So just to put a bit of a history on that, before 500 years ago, the Asante people, as we know them now, were 7 matrilineal clans, and that was your identity. So my family, we are Asuna, which is the elephant, but our totem is the black and white bird. And I must find out what it is. I don't know if it's a raven or a starling, but it's some kind of black and white bird, white bit here, I think. So that used to be your matrilineal clan. So if you went to a village, you might ask, what clan village is this? And they'll say to you, most of the people who live here are Oyoko or Asuna or whatever. And if you're a stranger, you might even be directed to the head of that clan in that village. That was the identity. But all these people who spoke the same language, who are now known as the Akan people, a lot of them were under another kingdom, which is also a Akan, called Dentre. And the Dentre were a bit closer to the coast, but a bit further in enough to be close to all the gold mines. So they were the controllers of the trade between the people of the interior and the whites on the coast, and part of the tributaries that people had to pay towards them. So it was people all the way above, going up to the north of Ghana as well. They would have to pay them in gold, in red clay, and also in people. As the years progressed, the numbers of people that they had to pay them in also grew. And it got to a point where there had been rumblings of, we've got to get together, all of us, to fight these people, because as the numbers of people they want grows, there's going to be a point where we're not going to be strong enough to be able to fight them. So there'd been several attempts, but there just was never could there be unity, because of familial problems. You're trying to get 7 different groups of people plus other people outside of that who are also now also another religion. You're also got 7 different clans, and you've got Muslims, and to try and bring them all in was just not working. So and also the other thing that used to happen is the kings would have to send the next in line to Dentre to be trained. So there was starting to be bigger and bigger generations who had allegiances really to Dentre, or would do things the Dentre way, which is not dissimilar to now. You know, if you look at Africa and the Caribbean, most of our leaders are going to the Ivy League universities of America or coming to Oxbridge. So that, you know, that creates a certain type of mindset, which is towards the rulers. So what happened was a young prince was born, but his mother couldn't have children, so she was sent to a river in the Akua region, which was like another kingdom but still related. And there was a river there called Tu, really good for people who can't have children. She had a child. In Asante, another king and queen had a child. He was born with the totems that showed that he was a priest already in his hand. They say he was born with these. You couldn't be both a king and a priest. That was like far too much power. So the legend says he was given to a priest and taken to Akua, the region where the prince has been born. He was brought up there. He was a very, very big magician, priest. He helped the people there defeat their enemies. He helped them find meat when they went hunting. Apparently by the age of 15, he was already a very important person. But because he wasn't from there, there was some jealousies and there was some fears that maybe he would try and take power there. And he ended up in prison. When the prince of Setutu went to visit the shrine that had helped him to be born, he would also go and pay tribute to the king. The king told him that somebody from your region is in prison here, and apparently Osetutu met this young priest Anoche and petitioned the king to please release him and he'll take him away from the land. And king's his name has gone from my head, of Akua, let Anoche go. So Anoche and Prince Osetutu came back to what is Asante, and it seems together they just had a revolutionary mindset, and they realized that this was the time, this was crunch time, there had to be unity. And Anoche, being such a powerful king, such a powerful priest, called a Durbar, got all the kings and queens together and said to them, there will be unity, and this unity is being sanctioned and will be blessed by the ancestors and by God. And so the first thing that he did was he and the people got them to fast. They did a 21-day fast. They came back to the spot and he said, God will choose who will be the king of all of the kings. And by the way God will do this, we will all agree to it because we'll see the power of God. Apparently the story is that he danced, he went in trance, and from the heavens the clouds opened and a golden stool came down and it landed on the lap of Prince Osetutu, making him the king of all these new people. And then legend says that the river Tano, which is nearby, came and delivered a sword to Anoche. And Anoche said, the stool must be kept in secret. It mustn't be sat on. This is our treasure. But as a daily reminder that everybody will see this sword, he plunged it into the ground and said, this is where it will remain. No human hand will ever be able to pull it out. But if they do, this is also the end of the Asante Confederacy. So people came, they had to go, they realized this was solid and they agreed to this confederacy. But the most important thing was that this would now be their new identity, and their clan affiliations, their blood affiliations, was only for the home and not for the outside. The only thing for the outside now was Asante, and Asa means dance and it also means war, and it's because of war. So that's what the people became known. They defeated Denche, formed their new capital in Kumasi, where you can go see the sword, see the statue of Kompanoche. Roll forward 400 years, the British have turned Accra and the southern parts of Ghana into the Gold Coast. They started to move up into the interior. They've had 6 battles by this stage, or wars, with the Asante people over about 250-year period. And they had won 3 and lost 3. And they came up, and but the last one they had won, they burnt down most of Asante, stripped, taken away the king, had taken away lots of other kings, and they came back and they were like, okay, we've got our fort that we built on your old palace, but you guys still haven't finished paying us for all the war indemnity that we've charged you with. And they say that the figure was just so high at that time that really was almost impossible. You'd have to have the whole of Asante doing nothing but digging gold to actually be able to pay this sum that they wanted. So the governor came and he said, but in the meantime, what I want is the golden stool. Queen Victoria wants to put her feet on it. I want to sit on it right now. This is in 1900. This was such an affront to the Asante, but there was very little will to really do anything because the last legitimate king had been taken away. The king who was on there now had been chosen by the British. The best warriors they felt had gone. Asante had actually been burnt down 2 times in the last kind of 50 years up until then. So the appetite for war was really not there. But there was a queen, Queen Yaa Asantewaa of Idriso. Her ancestor had been there at the time when the golden stool came down, and Komfanochi had asked for 3 kings to sacrifice themselves for the new Asante people to guarantee the defeat of Denche. What the king of Idriso had given himself. So he was either executed or I don't know if you can call it executed if you sacrifice yourself, but 2 of the people had to sacrifice, all 3 had to sacrifice their lives. He was one of them who had sacrificed his life. So 400 years later, when they came asking for the golden stool, Yaa Asantewaa, the queen of Idriso, whose brother had already been taken away by the British when they took away the king before, was the one who stood up. And she'd already actually made a mark of war, which is after Hodgson had asked for the golden stool, him and his wife went around shaking the hands of all the kings and queens. Yaa Asantewaa had been chewing some kola nut and she spat it into her hand and shook the hand of Hodgson's wife, which left the inside of our hands all red. Apparently this was already, that's a mark of war, like, yeah, we're going to be fighting. Obviously Hodgson and his wife didn't know about what that was. They probably just thought crazy old woman. And she invited all the kings and queens and they had a big meeting. Most of the men were like, we cannot fight another war with these people. And Yaa Asantewaa ended up starting a sexual strike, saying that if the men of Asante cannot stand up for Asante, then they cannot be men in the bedroom. But she still managed to gather people who were in favor of not giving away the golden stool. And the golden stool was was hidden away, and she fought the war. She was defeated, but the golden stool stayed in hiding for 27 years or 24 years. And that's why Yaa Asantewaa became such a big name and such a symbol of revolution and I suppose female empowerment, and why the secondary school, girls' school, was named after her. And I think she's still, even to today, really that kind of, female courage is seen in Yaa Asantewaa.
Wicked, thank you for sharing that, because that didn't come out in the last time we spoke, and I think that's really important. And then as we're sitting here, I found the page, man, and there were a few other articles, but it's out of this book here, sis. the Paradise Papers.
Oh, I haven't even heard of this one. Oh, I need to get that one.
And on the back here, you got here, in the beginning, God was woman.
Oh, wow.
It's an interesting read. I pulled it out. I've been pulling it out the last few days for a few different things. But the main thing I'm getting from it was, and then I've got to go back to some statements you made, but, just the idea of, the masculine God and, as the aggressor, as the creator, you name it, is a real new idea, a real new concept introduced by groups of people from particular places. And what they're doing within this book is just taking you around the world these groups from Northern Europe who made their way down south. And what were these groups up to? What were these groups dealing with? And why it made me think of this book when you were speaking was simply because you keep making reference to the red clay. The red clay. The mythology, it was one of the mythologies, definitely from Africa, but I'm sure it was the Asante tribe. They was talking about the red clay being associated with the goddess, one of the goddesses of that region, of that place, and how it was her menstrual blood that turned the clay red. And then it was from that red clay that the masculine could then form, or at that time the feminine would form human beings from the clay, about God creating man from clay and stuff like that. But then
that really makes sense, because when you go into any shrine house, all the shrine houses that I've been to are made from red clay. Even if they're in a region where they don't have red clay, it seems like red clay is brought there to build shrine houses. And then any kind of fetish that's made, so the actual shrine that's made, if that's got clay, it seems to be that it's originally made from red clay. So when you see it, most of them look black because there may have been blood sacrifices on them. But I remember asking, what's it made from? And they all talk about red clay. So that really, really, really makes sense. And I know there's a lot of stuff to do with ant hills. And it seems when I've gone about in Ghana, when I've seen ant hills, they all seem to come from the red earth that they seem to make the ant hills from. So maybe it's a particular kind of ant as well. But that really, really makes sense. Really makes sense.
Yeah. Well, ultimately in the book and that section, it was really just addressing the fact that in traditional cultures around Africa and the surrounding regions like Asia and all the rest of it, they had very much a tradition, a culture of upholding the woman. It was a balance, the yin and the yang, but there wasn't an issue in raising up the woman and allowing the woman to call the shots, basically, like mum does, as mum does.
Totally.
Yeah, and within the article here, I'll just read you a bit. It just says there, but it's talking about female children, and culturally in these other regions that, and you find it in religion today, the female child is, considered a burden, is considered a load, and you're restricted or limited to how many female children you may have in the family, that and the other. So that's what this section was. But just so you've got that Asante link here, it says, it says, we might also consider the possibility that in an even more personal way, just as Hebrews prayed for sons and rejoiced when male heirs were born to carry on the family line, in matrilineal societies, the birth of daughters was likely to have been considered a special blessing. Female children may have been especially cherished for the same reasons. According to the curators of the Archaeological Museum in Cambridge, even today, among the matrilineal of the Asante in Africa, female children are especially valued because of their power to transmit blood. Mogia.
Oh, yes, yes.
To continue the matrilineal Abusua.
Yeah, Abusua.
Family. And then they go into, I won't read it all, but they go into, the comparisons of all of the god and goddess archetypes and the mythologies associated with it. But then what you're finding is the further you go back, and you go back to Africa, this is basically fundamentally how we function, acknowledging these women, the goddesses, these various rites, and supporting that. And then as you're speaking and sharing mythology, it's like the sword in the stone. Have you heard of that before? Is there?
I know. It's so mad because when I first heard about Konfanochi and I went to see the sword, and you're like, I can't even believe I'm seeing this, but there it is in front of you. And then I did a little bit of research because I thought, okay, is it that there's just swords all over the place? Maybe there's a thing internationally. But what was interesting was I actually found that the present kind of British story that we hear about King Arthur and the Sword in the Stone was actually created in the 17th century. So the British story of the Sword in the Stone wasn't really like the one that we've got in the 70s that we ended up with, but I couldn't find what it was before the 17th century. And then mostly it went into actually the whole Arthurian thing was really made up in the set. Like there's tiny things, but what we know now was all created in the 17th century. So it's very likely that, because I know Anochi was mentioned by some British person who was dealing with Dentre and with the Fantis on the coast. So they were obviously hearing about this kingdom, even though they hadn't made their way into, I think the British actually didn't manage to go into Kumasi before 18 something or other, but they were hearing about these people. So it's really likely that actually they got the story and then just added it to something. But I haven't looked at it enough to actually see when was the first time the whole sword part was added to the Arthurian legend. I must look into that, because it's quite funny.
Well, I can assure you, I don't know the exact answer, but what I can assure you that it was all lifted and added to the mythology from somewhere else.
Yeah.
There's multiple reasons. And it's funny because I had a guy from the States come over, a good few years ago, and we ended up going to the Tower of London. He went to do the tourist thing and check out, all the London sites.
Yeah.
And I remember when going to the tower, in fact, it was the first time that I had actually been there inside as a tourist. And we're going around, and actually inside there, they've got like a shrine, an area where they've got all of the kings and queens lined up one by one. And I was this guy over from the States, so we've gone there, we've gone in the room, and we're looking around, and he's like, "Well, Darren, where's King Arthur?" And he was like, "Where's King Arthur?" And I'm like, "Bro, King Arthur isn't real. It's a mythology." He's like, "What are you talking about, man? I grew up in the States, understanding King Arthur to be, the British king and this, that, and the other." And I'm like, "Nah, bro, it's all mythology. It's not really real like that." In essence, as I understand it now, it holds principles and mythologies that are universal laws, principles that you find all over the place. So when you hear stories of, the sword and, the knights and, what was it, King Arthur and his 12 knights and making the 13th, you start playing out, if I was to throw out things like Jesus and the 12 disciples, Horus and his 12, guardians, you start realizing that there's a story of themes that run all throughout the world. And if you don't know the mythologies, you would just think maybe the King Arthur one is the first and the original, just like if you haven't heard any other stories of the myth, you might think Jesus is the original Christ and the mythology. Him is, special and unique to him. When you find out, no, you go to other places, they got their stories too, and even stories of the stool, and as you mentioned, the golden stool coming from heaven, and there's a lot there that is, threads that you find all, pretty much all around the world. Because from my perspective, it's like downloads, files that you can access from the consciousness, that if you've got access, you pull down the files and you get the knowledge and information and you apply it to your culture, to your environment. But what I gathered at that time with the English version of it, I believe, or the British, should I say, they lifted a lot from other cultures to create and curate their version of it, that they then disseminated to the world and said, hey, this is the truth, the whole truth, about the truth. And their job was to try and wipe out all the other versions of the story, so you couldn't be able to put all the pieces together. But you can't really do that, and they wasn't able to. And that's why I can sit and say, have you heard about the stone in the Slop in the British mythology? And you're like, yeah. And then you start looking at the dates, and you see that maybe our stuff even predates that, and you get into a lot of the mythology, especially in Africa and, amongst the Yoruba and traditions there. You've got the Iron Man, and we've got an Iron Man in comic books, and that ties in with, the gods with the axes, for example, or the hammers and things like that. You start seeing these tools and these technologies that are, you know, culturally used, and like you said, in these associations or societies, whether you're dressmakers or whether you're iron blacksmiths or whether you're drummers, you know, there was codes and information and knowledge that they were keepers of and held that, man. And, you know, I've got a better understanding of why we don't fully understand what it is of what we were doing in Africa, because it was held by those families and it wasn't for everybody. You needed to be the drummer to know the drum mysteries. You needed to be a blacksmith or an ironsmith to know the iron, you know, the iron mysteries and so forth. So it's interesting how we've got this far and we're coming full circle to you know, find out our knowledge and information. And I'm finding out in, you know, books like this, and you know, it really highlights the people in power at that time and in this time, what their agenda was, you know, and how they had a conscious effort to, you know, sweep all of that under the rug and push this new agenda, this new movement. And yeah, but the names like Yaa Asantewaa still live on, and I was just inspired by the fact that you got the schools named after her, man. Like, even in this country, they're female heroes. You know, I don't know if there's a Maggie Thatcher school or Margaret Thatcher school or, you know, Queen Victoria school even, you know, like if they acknowledge their heroes and heroes in that way. But no, I'm glad that, you know, we was able to touch on that.